Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 20th of May 2023. Let's get straight to our northeast sector, the opening point for the trip around the front line. That's Kupiansk to Svatva to Kreminna. That looks like this on my map. Kupiansk is there, Svatva is there, and Kreminna to the south. Not a huge amount going on, but some of the usual names getting mentioned. There is activity, it appears, going on in the north in this Maziutivka area. Again, as we've seen over the last few days, there are probing attacks from, I think, either side going on here. Russians took Maziutivka area, which is just to the east of Oskil River. It comes down there. And as a result, there's been continued action around there. Geolocated combat footage posted on May the 19th shows Ukrainian forces striking Russian positions near Maziutivka, and that is shown here. I won't show you the video, but this is geolocated to this position. Let's go and grab that, and whack it on my Google Maps here to see where the Ukrainians are hitting the Russians. So the Russians are there. They are being hit there by the Ukrainians. That's what you can imagine. That's the sort of activity that will be taking place in that area. Okay. Otherwise, it's just, as I say, some of the usual places. We have focuses on Sinkivka, which is in that general area in Sinkivka, and then it's Maziutivka and Liman Pershi. And otherwise, it's sort of unspecified attacks sort of further to the south. There is a report of the Russians attacking in Novoselivska, which is here near Kuzmivka, just on the western side of the railway and the road that comes down there. There's been this fight over Kuzmivka and Novoselivska for some time. I'm surprised it's still fairly much at a stalemate there. I was thinking the Ukrainians might have taken that. They did get a foothold in Kuzmivka at some point, but I guess unless you're going to be given a whole load of reinforcements to do that kind of work, it's just going to be stalemate for both sides. You know, you're not going to suddenly change things by doing the same thing over and over with the same amount of troops and equipment. You're going to need some kind of decent amount of reinforcements to make a difference pretty much anywhere along the front line, really. Okay, so as we come further down south, there's quite a lot of talk about Bilahorivka. So Russian forces continue limited ground attacks near Kreminna on May the 19th. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensive operations near Bilahorivka. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted a counterattack near Bilahorivka, although I think there's some other claims I've seen is that's Bilahorivka in Donetsk and not Bilahorivka here. So as you can see, here is the line. Donetsk Oblast is to the south and the west. Luhansk Oblast is up here. So this is Bilahorivka in Luhansk, right? So if the claim is about Bilahorivka in Donetsk, there is a Bilahorivka slightly further to the south, just down here, which is in Donetsk Oblast. So I don't know if ISW is confusing the two here. So it says a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted a counterattack near Bilahorivka and recaptured several unspecified lost positions in the area. The mill blogger additionally claimed that Russian forces advanced in the Serebryanska forest area near Shiplivka and attacked west and northwest of Kreminna near Nevska and Makivka. So that's the sort of place I was talking about before. But there's a claim from the Russians that they've made some gains in the Serebryanska forest. I showed that yesterday. It could be a reflection of what's taking place just in that area. They talk about near Shiplivka, which is there. So that would make sense of what Deep State Map showed yesterday. But as far as Bilahorivka goes, we've got some footage to show. Where is it? Shows some activity here. So to the north of the village of Bilahorivka in the Donetsk region. So this is not that one further to the north near the forest. A Russian assault group under the cover of BMP tried to storm the positions of the 8th OGSH BAT of the 10th OGSH BR Edelweiss, but the attempt was unsuccessful. The equipment was destroyed and the group was partially driven away and partially also destroyed. Here is just a short video of that activity taking place. So you've got the Russians attacking with various pieces of equipment. We have infantry fighting vehicles. There was a tank at the beginning there, um, and infantry as well. So a bit of combined arms, perhaps. Sorry, it's pixelating a bit, not particularly great quality. Struggling somewhat, and there you have, destroyed equipment in various places. The exact details are a bit sketchy, but yeah, that looks rather like. So here it says that there was a Ukrainian force that conducted a counterattack. That looks like a Russian attack that itself was sort of repelled. But anyway, nonetheless, there is possibly activity in that Bilorivka, possibly in this one further to the south. And there might have been some territory exchanged around this area. I don't know exactly. And then really we're on to Bakhmut again. So to give you the overview of Bakhmut, remind you that north and south of Bakhmut, my blue line represents the Russian line here, as according to Andrew Perpetua, the map at Andrew Perpetua. The red line is a Russian line according to Surrey maps, and the yellow line is a Russian line according to pro-Ukrainian map, a deep state map. Now, there hasn't been all that much change to the mapping in any of the areas, it seems. None of the mappers are reflecting too much change. Let's go and look at some general claims about that in the ISW in their preamble bit, actually. So, and this is super important to understand because I'm going to talk a little bit about what success looks like, and that is entirely dependent on what your goals are. Right. So, Ukrainian Defense Minister Malyar stated on May the 19th that Russian forces concentrated most of their reserves in the Bakhmut direction, which has slowed the rate of Ukrainian advances. It seems that's the case. There isn't too much change in the mapping. Malyar also stated that Ukrainian forces continue to counterattack on the northern and southern outskirts of Bakhmut and advance 500 meters on one flank and 1,000 meters on the other. Don't know exactly where that would be. Some Russian mill bloggers celebrated the slowed Ukrainian rate of advance and claimed that Ukrainian forces are unable to sustain prolonged localized counterattacks around Bakhmut. That might well be true. I think that they aren't throwing too much into these flank attacks, and they are localized. It's not a counter-offensive operation, or at least it's a shaping operation for the larger counter-offensive elsewhere. So if they have slowed down, that doesn't surprise me because I don't think they're throwing that much into this. Russian forces on Bakhmut's flanks likely remain weak, however, and I agree with that. Wagner Group financier Prigozhin continued to criticize the Russians, and here the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade, on May the 19th for retreating from defensive lines southwest of Ivanivska. Ukrainian counterattacks near Bakhmut have notably likely eliminated the threat of a Russian encirclement of Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut and forced Russian troops to allocate scarce military resources to defend against a limited and localized offensive effort as Ukrainian command likely intended. Right, exactly. And I think that is absolutely spot on from the ISW there. So, as I've told you, this is, I think, a shaping operation to draw in Russian reserves from elsewhere, which has happened. That's according to both sides. They've been drawn in there to defend the flanks and to continue trying to make gains in the center. And therefore, if you're going to judge the success of what is taking place in Bakhmut, in and around Bakhmut from a Ukrainian point of view, that is a success. So it really actually doesn't matter whether the Ukrainians are going to advance or not here. If the Russians pile in reserves and stabilize this front line, then that is in itself a success for the Ukrainians. Now, if the Ukrainians have a goal of surrounding Bakhmut and surrounding Wagner and eliminating those troops, then they are going to be less successful because they will struggle to do that without throwing loads more forces into that area. But I don't think that that's really their primary goal. If they'd managed to surround Bakhmut, then they would have been, yeah, this is amazing. But I don't think that's what they're doing. Their primary goal is to suck in Russian forces and attrit them, and not have a kind of routed withdrawal from the center of Bakhmut. So these flanks have given the Russians pause for thought. They were unable to take the whole of Bakhmut really quickly and surround the Ukrainian troops. The Ukrainians sent in these groups north and south to stop that from happening. So that is, I think, a success if that was one of their intentions. And then to draw in the forces from Kreminna, from Adiivka, and from other places, Marinka apparently, forces have been taken from those areas and delivered to Bakhmut, and that is a continued success. So that there has been very little movement. This Russian pro-Russian voices will say, "Oh, you're coping. You're no." You've got to understand what's strategically going on here. What are the goals? The question is, what are the goals? The goals, I don't think, and again, I could be wrong, right? Of course, I could, but I don't think the goals are to take territory, this bit of territory. I don't think Ukraine are going to say, right, strategically, because these decisions are getting made from this level, right? From this level, the goal of the Ukrainians isn't to take a hill next to Klishchivka. It's just not, like, that's irrelevant. Whether they take 200 meters near Klishchivka or don't take 200 meters near Klishchivka, what is the goal of someone like Zaluzhny that's looking at Bakhmut? Right, what do we want from Bakhmut? None of it is intrinsically, like, in and of itself, uh, useful. Like, there's no valuable, there's no intrinsic value to Klishchivka when you're looking at the map from this position, right? What is useful is that the Russians are drawn away from other areas and sent into Bakhmut, and they're fixed there, unable to do anything other than hang around Bakhmut, fighting around Klishchivka. So I'm not coping. This is literally how you look at this, the kind of strategy and thus tactics of the area. So I don't think Ukrainians have made a huge amount of gain around Klishchivka area. Syriac maps has shown that there are some gains, but that could be readjusting to their inaccuracy from the day before. But gains around this area, their mapping has moved back from areas around here to more to where it is now. The red lines there. Deep State map haven't changed any mapping in this area, but has updated in the center. And Andrew Perpetua, I don't think, has changed any mapping in the last 24 hours. Whether that's just because he hasn't done the mapping or because there's no movement, I'm not exactly sure. So you've got, broadly speaking, stability north and south, but that might not be the case. It's going to be very dynamic. It's just that no exact information has come out about that. And then when you go into Bakhmut, you have some changes in favor of the Russians, as was expected. So let's go and have a look at what the ISW says. Actually, before we do that, let's look at Poulet-Volon's map. Here is what is going on to the north of Bakhmut. You've got Bakhmut here, and there is pressure on, but there's no big yellow areas that indicate gains yesterday. There's just general gains here from this kind of counterattack phase, and indeed up in Saku-Vansetti up there. And then we go into the middle. As you can see, it looks like Russia now control pretty much the whole of Bakhmut, bar some very small areas to the southern area of the western outskirts. And then down south again, some yellow areas that indicate where the counterattacks have been taking place. And it's very close to Klishchivka, tiny bit more area. And that's that area that Syriac maps had a change in to show that actually the Ukrainians might have gained that tiny bit in the last 24 hours. But you can see it's fairly stable, and it actually indications that the Russians are pushing back here. That's the important part. So that'll be as a result of the reserves being sent into the area. That's not the case in the north. It seems to be that the reserves are being thrown into the south to push back more, that they were worried more that there would be an imminent collapse south of Bakhmut. Okay, so that's the situation as I see it around Bakhmut. As we go into Bakhmut, remember my map changes here. The blue line is no longer Andrew Perpetua's line, but the lines that the Russians were at yesterday. In other words, the blue area behind the yellow and red is where both mappers agree that Ukraine has ceded territory. So the Russians have gained all of this area in the center here, well, in the center, at the edges of Bakhmut, the western edges. So it really is a case that the Ukrainians have been pushed out and only have some kind of hold over this very southwestern corner. There's a bit of disagreement between the yellow of Deep State map and the red of Syriac maps there, but both agree that the Ukrainians still maintain a little bit of presence here at that that corner. So yeah, the question is, as I've said yesterday and the day before, what is a function that Bakhmut provides? It is attriting and fixing. Can they still get that function from not being in this edge of Bakhmut or from not being in Bakhmut at all? I don't know. I don't know that it would be as attritional unless they pull out of Bakhmut and then, I mean, really what you could do, since Bakhmut has been lost, there's no value there, and if you can assume that there are still no civilians there, what you could do, or if the civilians are there, they're going to be well under in the basements. What you could do, if you had some kind of air advantage in the area, I think superiority is just too much of a pipe dream at the moment. If you had some kind of ability to flatten this with J dams or whatever, that would be the perfect time, right? Wagner have taken Bakhmut, well done. Okay, you're all in there. Now let's carpet bomb it. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, that I don't think they'd have the ability to do that. But that would be, I think, the only way of continuing the level of attrition that they've seen, because I don't think you'll get that level of attrition fighting here. But it depends what the Ukrainians do in terms of pulling back to Ivaniska or trying to maintain as much of this buffer zone as possible. And it also depends what the Russians do. Do they just culminate, stop here and say, put up their flag all around Bakhmut, say, yeah, we have won, we have taken Bakhmut, this is a victory. And of course, that is a PR victory, but it is no real other victory. There's no value to Bakhmut in and of itself. So do they stay there or do they continue fighting westwards towards Ivanivska and then towards Chasiv Yar? Well, it's taken a year for them to just about take Bakhmut. How long would it take them to take Chasiv Yar? I mean, they have culminated. Yes, they've got reinforcements, but now the Russians have to deal with a counteroffensive that is going to take place pretty much any day now. Now, according to the Minister of Defense for Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, the Russians are losing a battalion a day near Bakhmut. According to him, the total number of enemy losses in the Bakhmut direction is up to 70,000 killed and wounded. That is going to be, I assume, since the beginning of the conflict around there, so a year's worth of fighting around Bakhmut. Now, it should be noted that depending on the national characteristics of the military organization, the number of in a battalion ranges from 400 to 800. But even at 400 people a day, this is an incredibly attritional place. And that is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Will it continue to be so? That's a question. Then in the very corner of Bakhmut where the Ukrainians have been holding out, there has supposedly been incendiary munitions used last night. Of course, verification is quite difficult. But this looks like quite a widespread area, far more than the Ukrainians are hanging out in. So I don't know if that's definitely the case, or perhaps that is really difficult to see in the dark what that kind of refers to geographically speaking. But it could be that actually they've just been laying, dropping incendiary munitions on this kind of area and that area in that kind of L shape. It does look like that shape could be reflected in that video footage. So that has been taking place, and there's other footage as well to suggest that. The war mapper mappers say that there have been no confirmed changes to control since the last update. I would disagree with that. I think there's certainly been a change in the center there. Syriac Maps indeed claims that, and a little bit of push towards the very last remnants of the Ukrainian control, pushing into that, taking some territory there, and then going out of Bakhmut. There is this area, or zooming out a little bit, there is this area that we're just talking about that represents 0.6 square kilometers. So it's a very small amount of territory that the Ukrainians are still clinging on to. And as is indicated here, they're pulling out towards Ivaniska from those western outskirts. As they say, the Russian army took control over the remaining areas and withdrew towards southern positions. Now only 0.6 square kilometers of the city remain under Ukrainian control. I just want to mention something about the rapidity of the Ukrainian counter-attack, although that has stalled. Carl R. here on my comment said, I rolled back deep state maps. He said this 2 days ago. It was when Russians were saying to me that these are pitiful gains. And you're like, well, actually, if we look at the gains that Ukrainians have made within less than a week, that area equates to, he said, I rolled deep state's map back, and the area north of Bakhmut is not about the same as on the 14th of March, whereas a southern area is about the same as on the 14th of January. So, in fact, just in less than a week, they've rolled back 2, 3, 4 months worth of Russian gains. So it's not pitiful when you're comparing it to what the Russians themselves have done. However, as I've said many times, it does appear to have stalled. The Russians have sent their reserves in, but that is, one would argue, exactly what the Ukrainians intended. Um, Certainly from the decisions being made further up that chain. Sorry, I didn't realize I still had the sound from that video on in the background, so apologies for that. I promised I would return to the ISW. They said various voices in the Russian information space are prematurely declaring that Wagner forces have completed the capture of Bakhmut. I mean, they're pretty much there, but that's been drawing ire from other dominant voices. Russian forces slightly increased. Then it's on to Avdiivka. So not too much to say that I haven't already said from the ISW, so I won't repeat myself. So as we move further down south, there has actually been a slightly like a really small sliver of change in this area here. Now, I told you the other day that in the Sumy, New York area, there was some kind of counterattack activity from the Ukrainians, but I've not seen it reflected in any maps, just claims of that. Well, actually, Deep State just marginally changed a bit of land in this area. No other details on that, so I think that's probably reflecting what took place there. I've also seen both Deep State Deep State changed the mapping yesterday to actually go in line with Syriac Maps, and Syriac Maps has had that for a good week. So I just think Deep State Map hadn't had the information, now has the information to confirm Syriac Maps. So I think, I give Syriac Maps quite a lot of credibility in their mapping when Russia are on the attack. And I think, quite often, as you see, pro-Ukrainian map, a Deep State map catch up sometimes, I think that then confirms that there is accuracy with Syriac maps. They both seem to indicate a tiny bit of gain just in this area north of Krasnohorivka, but otherwise there is stability in Avdiivka. The ISW says Russian forces slightly increased their tempo of ground attacks along the Avdiivka-Donetsk city line yesterday, following a week-long slowdown. The General Staff of the Ukraine reported yesterday that Russian forces conducted unsuccessful attacks near Novokalinove, so that's to the north. Stepova, that's to the north, near Krasnohorivka, where we're just at. Avdiivka itself, Siverny to the south, Pervomaisky to the southwest, and then Marinka and Novomerkalivka further to the south, much further to the south. A notably greater number of settlements than the Ukrainian General Staff has listed over the past week. The Russian source claimed that there were no significant changes in the Avdiivka direction, and that Russian forces made marginal advances in western Marinka. So Russian forces are apparently making advances there. The source also claimed on May the 19th that Ukrainian forces, I'm going to talk about this, increased their rate of artillery fire in Avdiivka. Russian independent investigative outlet, this is the part I was going to talk about, Vazhnie iStories, reported that a Ukrainian HIMARS strike destroyed up to 10 Russian T-90 tanks east of Marinka on an unspecified date. Okay, so coming out of Avdiivka, there is, the repelled attacks all around, it seems. Siverny, Pervomaisky, and then further to the north in Stepova and Novokalinove are up there. So as we come down to Marinka, there are these reports that I told you about in my news video this morning. This is the video. So the video appears to indicate ISR activity, so intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. They're indicating that there are some 10 tanks here. I don't think any of these are actually, blown up or destroyed. I think these are all in position, but you can guarantee that if the Ukrainians are going to find 10 tanks in position, like T-90 tanks, some of the best tanks, that these guys will be hit. I mean, the report is these tanks have been hit by HIMARS strikes overnight, but there's no proof of that. There's no verification of that. So it might not be the case, but I think it would be entirely implausible for the Ukrainians to spot all this kit and not attack it, because otherwise, what's the point of having the drone in the air? I mean, this is the job of this drone, is to spot that kit. And the claim is that that kit was indeed blown up by HIMARS strikes. We might see the remnants of that in further drone surveillance. I don't know. HIMARS burned down a company of T-90 tanks of the Russian armed forces in Donetsk. They were being prepared for an assault on Marinka, and that's on the night of May the 19th. So that is basically last night. Strong explosions thundered in the occupied Donetsk. According to preliminary data, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a large accumulation of military equipment from the Russian forces in the Petrovsky district of the city. The resource Operational ZSU was the first to report this. This information was soon published by the well-known Ukrainian military correspondent Andrei Sapilenko. There is no official confirmation yet. So, and there's all the sort of geolocation of it. And the claim from Sapilenko is reported the company of T-90s, and that's up to 10 tanks were destroyed at night by HIMARS strike. Tanks spotted by the Poseidon drone, so on and so forth. So where is that? Well, Andrew Perpetua's geolocated that to this position. Let's put that into Google Maps and see what turns up. And this is behind Marinka by quite some distance, not a huge distance, I guess, but you know, I mean, that's obviously easily within a HIMARS range. And that's arguably within our artillery range. But that is a really good haul of equipment if that did indeed happen. Right, let's move on to the rest of Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson. Now, there is some more activity in a place that we haven't really heard from before. Russian Milborger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted a counterattack near Solodka. Now, this was actually seen in deep state maps updates yesterday. I didn't tell you about it because actually it didn't change my mapping, but I logged that as like, oh, there must be some activity there if deep state's just marginally changing the map. So that's in Donetsk Oblast, southwest of Donetsk city. The source claimed that Ukrainian forces are attempting to advance southeast of the settlement towards the H20 highway to Volnovakha, but did not specify an outcome of the attack. Ukrainian forces have recently conducted limited and localized counterattacks in Western Donetsk. So let's have a little think about that. So this is Marinka, and as we move on towards Vuhledar, you have Novomykolivka, where there's been quite a bit of activity, and then this area of Solodka. So Solodka, their deep state map changed the mapping that fell in line with what I've already got here, but it was like a gaining of kind of this area there. So I didn't mention it, but actually Poulet Volant has it in their mapping, which indicates no, not on there. So if we look at their other map here, yeah, here it is. So this is the Poulet Volant's map that shows that there is a gain for the Ukrainians in that Solodka area, and they have been attacking there whilst the Russians are attacking further north to Novomykolivka. The rest of this area has been fairly quiet of late. So that other than what has been mentioned here by ISW and indications on maps, I don't have any more details to share with you. But that is certainly worth keeping an eye on. And the idea, according to ISW, is that, or at least from the Russian mill bloggers, is that there's an attempt to circle back round to Volnovakha. So Volnovakha is here, and actually this is a staging point for the Russians. They have quite a bit of kit, I think, there that they help to resource this sector of the map. The Vuhledar attacks. So Volnovakha gets hit quite a lot. There's railway that passes through there. It's that railway is very close to the front line. So we go to the War Mapper map. You can see Volnovakha there. It's a bit of a railway junction. So that gets hit quite routinely with HIMARS and whatnot. Okay, moving on to see what the ISW has to say about the rest of the front line. So while there's no information about Kherson, a little bit about Zaporizhia that's worthy of note. Ukrainian Zaporizhia Oblast Military Administration and Ukrainian Melitopol Mayor Fedorov reported on the 18th and 19th that Russian forces are preparing for an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive by flooding the fields of the Vasilivsky Rayon. So that's south of Zaporizhia city, and the Yakiminsky Rayon in the Melitopol area. ISW previously reported on Russian efforts to flood the area near the Kokovka reservoir in a misguided attempt to bolster defensive preparations. So it could be that the Russians are trying to flood areas so that it is more difficult for the Ukrainians to attack through there, to use mechanized equipment in that area, to use infantry. So that is possibly something that is taking place. And then really it's talk about sort of strikes on the Zaporizhia area, strikes on Crimea. As I mentioned this morning, one of the most significant was a potential Storm Shadow strike. It might not be Storm Shadow, but given the distance from Mariupol, if you look at where Mariupol is, you're going to hit the airport in Mariupol. I mean, if you're going to have a safe HIMARS distance, is going to be something like there. You're talking about 100 kilometers. So that's out of HIMARS range, really, unless you're going to be really inaccurate. Just a couple of explosions, I think at least one large explosion would indicate Storm Shadow. Sorry, I'm trying to zoom in, but my fingers are being a bit rubbish. So let's go and find where that airbase is. So Tendar has geolocated that, the strikes on the base to being, or the base being here, and it seems like the strikes were in this general direction. So that's where the base is. So yeah, that's going to be a good 100 kilometers from HIMARS. So probably Storm Shadow, you would assume. And there was some rumors because Shoigu has been visiting the area that could have been trying to hit Shoigu. There were helicopters that had landed there. There are some claims that 150 Russian personnel died in that as well, or were liquidated in some way. There various claims. Don't know what the exact details are, and certainly that won't be verifiable from what the Russians claim. So I don't know. Some big hits in Mariupol, and you're seeing that all over this kind of Zaporizhia region as the Ukrainians are definitely softening up targets and the battlefield for the coming counteroffensive. Anyway, that's the Frontline update for the 20th of May. Thank you so much for your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you later.